Hello everyone, welcome to episode 84 of the Impulso podcast by Momentum Works. Today's episode will be a bit different from our usual programming, and we will be showing you a snippet of the press release for our Ecommerce in Southeast Asia 2024 report that was just launched this week. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our press briefing about e-commerce in Southeast Asia. And so I hope you guys have been having a great Monday. So we've scheduled an hour to talk about this topic and specifically the findings of our e-commerce in Southeast Asia report 2024, which we are releasing to the public tomorrow. So today with me is Wei Han, who is our insights lead at Momentum Works. She has led the authoring of this report. Wei Han.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Okay, cool. Next page, please. So some of you might remember a year ago in June 2023, we released last year's report on e-commerce in Southeast Asia, where we look at the competitive dynamics, the macro trends of e-commerce in all the 6 key markets of the region. And back then we had this conclusion, which I will read. The end game might not be a steady state, but a result of continuously shifting currents and how leading platforms are able or unable to ride such currents. So as we are zooming into what has happened in the last year, a lot of things have changed. But I would say that this conclusion still holds.
Okay, let's start off. So I'm pretty sure we all know that in 2023, there are a lot of uncertainties and a lot of challenges that many of the platforms have faced. But the thing is that the overall e-commerce platform still managed to grow quite a bit over the past few years. So we have reached about 114.6 billion in terms of GMV coming from the 8 major platforms, e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia. And this is up by about 15% since 2022. But if we were to compare it with the first year of the pandemic, it is almost like a doubling of the overall GMV in the region. However, we also do know that this growth is actually pretty uneven across different platforms as well as in different countries. So let's move on to the next slide where we look at the country specifics. So if you can see here, Indonesia still remains the largest market in Southeast Asia, reaching a GMV of 53.8 billion in 2023. And they're still considered the largest player, accounting to about around 46.9% of the entire region's GMV. But if you can take a look at Thailand as well as Vietnam, these are the 2 countries which actually contributed the most in terms of the growth. And you can see that Vietnam has grown by about 52.9%, whereas Thailand has grown by about 34.1%. So very significant growth by these 2 countries. But if you were to also to look at Philippines as well as Malaysia and Singapore, the countries mentioned actually also recorded decent growth, about almost double-digit growth for all the 3 countries mentioned. So I think let's move on to the next part where we look at the market share by country for each of the key players. So from here, you can tell that Shopee leads in all countries with a GMV of $55.1 billion. And you can see that Lazada is still relatively strong. So they are at about 18.8 billion in terms of their GMV. And they are the second largest in Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, as well as Singapore. But I would like to draw your attention to TikTok Shop. So it has now caught up with Tokopedia in terms of its GMV, reaching about 16.3 billion. And I think in the next slide, you would see that the combined GMV of Tokopedia and TikTok would actually put them at around the second largest platform in Southeast Asia. So let's look at the key players first. So you can see here that most of the platforms here actually recorded quite decent growth over the years. Shopee is still the largest and have continued to maintain its growth in terms of GMV and has about a market share of about 48% in 2023. However, I would like you to take a look at TikTok Shop in particular. You can see that from 2022 to 2023, they have actually almost quadrupled or had their GMV grown by 4 times. And it is almost at the same scale as Tokopedia and Lazada. And last but not least, you can also see that Temu has actually entered Southeast Asia in 2023, specifically in the countries of Malaysia and Philippines, and their estimated GMV is less than $0.1 billion. So I think Janggan has some insights in terms of what they are going to be focusing on in Southeast Asia, or whether they will not focus on Southeast Asia.
Let me add a few pointers to this slide. And obviously, last year, what people were concerned about is TikTok Shop was aggressively pushing the growth in the market, and people were concerned about Shopee not being able to hold their position. But if we look at the total numbers, I mean, Shopee's market share of 48% is roughly the same as the previous year. We look at TikTok Shop and Tokopedia combined. That puts them already at about 60% of Shopee's total GMV. That makes them a very relevant player in this region. And another thing we should look at is this number looks at the whole year of 2023. And obviously, we know that TikTok has been following a growth trajectory with a little bit of a glitch between October and December when they were banned by Indonesia. So if we look at the numbers in the second half of the year, on a month where they were not banned or ceasing operations, they were actually at a position where I think in Indonesia, they might not be that far from Shopee already. So this year, depending on how the integration they have with Tokopedia goes, they could very much become the #1 player in Indonesia. So in addition to the macro numbers, we also look at key trends in Southeast Asia this year. Next page. So we have summarized 4 key trends on live commerce, generative AI adoption, e-commerce enablers, as well as third-party logistic providers. So one thing we have seen in Southeast Asia over the last 2 years, ever since TikTok started pushing aggressively, is live commerce. People doing sort of live videos while selling products. During the first half of the year, we also organized 2 live commerce immersions for people in the ecosystem to go to China's cities of Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and especially the live commerce capital, Hangzhou, respectively. We visited top live studios, top MCNs, the ecosystem. We talked to the platforms, we talked to the investors, and we explored the supply chain. So I think lots of learning points, but a bigger conclusion is that people believe that the live commerce would work in Southeast Asia. And during these discussions, and we kind of figured out that a bigger issue that people need to figure out is the supply. Trend number 4, logistics. We all know that logistics is a key infrastructure of e-commerce because that delivers the goods from the warehouses, from the sellers to the consumers. So on the left of this page, you would see a comment made by Shopee's leadership in their last earnings call. More than 50% of their orders in Southeast Asia are now delivered by their in-house logistic arm, Shopee Express. And more than 70% of their orders in Brazil are developed in-house. So of course, that puts lots of pressure on the third-party players. And on this page, you would see, I mean, some of the vehicles of Shopee Express. On the bottom right, that's their sorting center in Brazil. And you can see the scale and the investment they have been making in logistics. So the pressure is on the third-party players. Even the largest e-commerce logistic player in the region, GMV Express, which in the first quarter of this year delivers 11.3 million parcels a day. That's about a quarter of what they do in China, which is quite significant. You see the amount of revenue they could charge per order has declined since 2021. That shows, I mean, the concentration of e-commerce platforms and how that does to the third-party e-commerce logistic players. And now that leads to the question of, next page, please, whether TikTok Shop would build its own logistics. And some of you might have read in the news that TikTok has been building local services, I mean, restaurant advertisement, and maybe food delivery. So will they build their own e-commerce logistics? Our assessment is that they don't have plans at the moment, but we also know that this is a company which is, I mean, despite its size, it's very agile and it makes lots of decisions based on data. So if one day they make the calculation that, okay, ROI of building or acquiring their own logistics has become positive, they might execute. So you will not shy away from things because it's difficult. You shy away from things because the ROI doesn't make sense. So one day we might expect them to build their own logistics. Another question which I think people in Indonesia will care a lot is whether Temu, the overseas arm of Pinduoduo or PDD Group, will enter Indonesia. So in the last quarter, there has been a lot of speculation that Temu is exploring the entry of Indonesia. And of course, there are reasons for this speculation because a lot of the payment and logistic providers in the country were approached by Temu executives for information. So, and of course, the government becomes very concerned, right? Because Temu is known for running its full consignment or full management model to ship massive amount of Chinese manufactured goods directly cross-border to the consumers. But what we do think is that, Temu now has a pretty stable footing in its global markets, especially in developed countries. And knowing Pinduoduo as an organization, I don't think they will leave Indonesia alone. I think they will find a way to play a role in the Indonesian market. But I do think they are smart enough to know that the pure cross-border model is not welcome in Indonesia, and they will probably explore a different model. Even in the US, now they are pivoting from pure cross-border to local. And since March this year, most of their marketing spend in the US has been focused on sellers which have goods already stored in a warehouse in the US. Next page. And this page shows Temu's footprint since its launch in September 2022, right? As of 1st of July, the first of this month, they were available in 72 countries and territories, covering most of the developed world. And we know that since then, another name has been added to the list. So they're still constantly expanding. Next page. And they have also been expanding their GMV. And I do have a number of public market investor friends who have been doing nothing but looking at Temu closely for the last year and a half because they hold lots of Pinduoduo shares. And many of them, I've been discussing with many of them, and some of them are fairly confident that Temu is already close to break even. And two of them, based on their calculation, have said that, okay, I do think that Temu has already achieved break even. So this is a formidable organization. And if they decide to come to Southeast Asia, Shopee has occupied the mind share of low cost products, and Temu could still be a formidable competitor because organization-wise, they're very, very efficient. And whether they will probably enter this region. So it will be interesting and for all the ecosystem players to think about, if it becomes a fight between Temu, Alibaba, TikTok Shop, and Shopee, where should our position be? E-commerce enabler, logistic player, etc., etc. I hope that what we have shared in the last 40 minutes give you a brief understanding about the currents, the trends, the competitive dynamics, and the strategy of key players, as well as the happenings in China, which might impact the markets in Southeast Asia. Now back to what we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation and the conclusion in our last year's report. The end game might not be a steady state, but a result of continuously shifting currents and how these platforms are able to or unable to ride such currents. So when we look at each e-commerce platform, how exactly they will succeed or how exactly they will place themselves in a competition, it might make sense not to look at simply at their existing financials, their performance, their GMV, etc. You might want to go into the organization to look at who are the leaders, who are the key people, and that will make a lot of assessment far more accurate.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Impulso podcast. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you find today's insights interesting, do check out our Ecommerce in Southeast Asia 2024 report, which will be linked in the show notes. As usual, do like our podcast and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your preferred podcast platforms to stay up to date on the latest happenings and trends in e-commerce, tech, new retail, and the broader digital economy. Bye-bye.